Good evening, everyone. Hi, I'm Jennifer Steinhauer, Senior Director here at the Institute of Politics, and welcome to this evening's event, Journalists on the Front Lines, A Year of War and Conflict, featuring the well-known Israeli journalist Noga Tarnopolsky, who has covered the region for 2 decades, and Los Angeles Times foreign correspondent and Pulitzer Prize-winning photographer Marcus Yam. This conversation will be moderated by New York Times opinion columnist and former foreign correspondent Lydia Polgreen. Of the scores of events that the Institute of Politics stands up each academic year, I confess that centering journalists is my favorite. Every April, we bring some of the best reporters from around the United States and around the world to talk about their profession in an event dedicated to the memory of David Broder, a titan of journalism whose career began here at the University of Chicago, where he earned his bachelor's degree in 1947 and a master's in 1951. Known for his ability to cut through the noise of punditry, Broder for the Washington Post framed his campaign coverage by looking beyond the political machine, turning public attention to voters whose voices might otherwise be drowned out. He passed away in 2011, having established a legacy of integrity and professionalism, and the IOP is very proud to know the Broder family as both benefactors of this event and friends. In recent years, this dinner conversation has appropriately shifted away from celebrating great political coverage to focusing on the urgent issues of the safety of journalists, hundreds of whom have been killed, injured, kidnapped, or silenced in their effort to maintain a free and open press, a cornerstone of our democracy. You will notice on our stage tonight an empty chair. This represents the loss of scores of journalists from Gaza and their families since the war began there in October. The cost to that community of journalists has already been too hard to bear. Here in the United States, the threat has largely been created through the decline of local journalism, made so by avarice and other factors, and we hope deeply to see local journalism repaired in this country. Rebuilding a vibrant local ecosystem and upholding all press freedoms will forever be a cornerstone of the mission here at the IOP. So we thank you all for being here and your interest in journalism. Now please welcome to the stage Noga Tarnopolsky, Marcus Yam, and my friend and former colleague, Lydia Polgreen.
Well, that music feels appropriate because both of my various team colleagues here have been under tremendous pressure, doing very tough work under not so easy circumstances in Israel and in the West Bank, and I'm sure would very much like to be able to go to Gaza, although no one is able to at the moment. But let's start with the most immediate. I mean, Marcus, you just landed back from Jerusalem via Doha, I think. Mm-hmm. So maybe you could just start by talking a little bit about what you've been seeing, how you've been working, what's the feeling on the ground, and how have you been operating?
I'll start off by saying I was in eastern Mexico when the war broke out, and I was given like 24 hours to get to Israel. And I arrived October 9th, early hours of October 9th. Couldn't fly in. I booked like 4 separate plane tickets, and they were all canceled. Had to cross by land, landed Jordan, walked over, and ever since then it's been a whirlwind. From the first couple of days, we just hopped in a rental car, drove south as close as we can to Gaza to see what we can, and obviously it's a mess. I mean, Noga, you've probably seen it too. They haven't even cleaned it up. There were body bags everywhere. Still, the carnage is still very, very visible.
And bodies not in bags also.
Bodies not in bags also. And I would also say that covering some of that, covering a little bit of like the news and the war in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem, and then also then came the moment when we thought we would get to go into Gaza, but then really not, and we haven't been able to get into Gaza unless you were invited by the IDF into one of their like embeds, which we haven't even gotten an invite for. Other publications have been invited.
Yeah.
And it's kind of forced me to really explore the West Bank. an area which I don't really have any experience in, and I've had to like just go up and down, just covering the news there, and also covering what's going on these, the Israeli side from time to time.
Yeah. Noga, walk us through what your life has been like for the past 6 months. I mean, first of all, what was that morning like?
So I brought something. I want you to hear what woke me up very early in the morning. I was in Jerusalem of the 7th of October. Let's see if we can hear it. So it was this bright sunny day, and I had, initially in the first few seconds, no idea what was happening. And pretty quickly I realized it was something of a magnitude that we had not previously contemplated. In part because there was so little news. On the normal channels, switching on Israeli radios, trying to get information from official government channels, there was almost no news, and it was mysterious. Like, had they all been hit? Was there a viral attack, cyber attack? It took a little while to grasp that the country had been caught so completely unprepared, and that at, let's say, 8 a.m., when I was beginning to make these phone calls and trying to understand what was happening, I could call friends and people I knew in the South, but they couldn't really speak. And it did take a while to realize these people were under assault, hiding, and couldn't answer phones. And the authorities had little to no idea what was happening. And so that kind of attack was not something I had contemplated. And in a different way, I was prepared for some major disaster to happen, because there had been warning after warning after warning from all kinds of military and intelligence authorities to the government that Israeli defenses were not in a good place, that Israeli deterrence had been badly damaged by the government's efforts to perpetrate a sort of coup d'etat. And what I had expected was to hear news of a catastrophe that was born out of a constitutional crisis. I expected people would be dead. I expected there would be chaos. So I was steeled for that, but I didn't know the details. And it didn't take long. The lack of precise news within 2 or 3 hours made it clear to me that we were talking about at least many hundreds of dead, that the magnitude of this was massive.
Yeah. So you're waking up at home, Marcus. You're in Mexico and frantically sniffing the vanilla and making frantic plans to travel. In that moment, how do you think about? Obviously you're waking up as both just a person living in a place, right? Suddenly thinking like, oh my gosh, I don't actually know what's going on, and trying to reach, people around you. Marcus, you land and you're a journalist, and you need to sort of immediately snap into that mode. What's your first move? I mean, you described sort of driving to the south, but kind of paint a picture for us, and then maybe we can look at some of your photos as well of like what is that experience like, and what are the what are the first things that you do when you land in a situation like that to try and wrap your head around like, what's the story I'm going to tell here?
First of all, I'd say, as you know, this job is 90% logistics, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm in Mexico. I don't have half my things. I'm there on a fluff assignment doing a story about the vanilla industry. Barely have enough clothes. I'm thinking... And you probably don't have your Kevlar vests, helmets, things like that you would normally have to... literally have to figure out where my things are. I mean, I luckily for me, I've been living on the road for 5 years, and I've like deposited things in different parts of the world. And so I figured out like, all right, I have a set PPE in New York, I have one in Lebanon, and I have one in Kabul, and one in Seoul. So like, how can I get one of them shipped to me and I can intercept it? So I arrange that, intercept my gear in Jordan, and then from there, head in. And as somebody who covers breaking news, and I'm somebody who they call a parachute journalist by definition, right? Then the only thing that I'm worried about is getting to the heart of it as fast as possible. Because once you wait a certain amount of time, access closes down. I think access is, what I've learned in covering previous wars and conflicts is that in the beginning, the first 72 hours, the first 96 hours, when it's the most chaotic, is when you definitely get to cut through everything and get in as fast as possible and get to get past a lot of roadblocks, get past a lot of security checkpoints. So that's why when me and my colleague Nabi Boulos, the Middle East bureau chief, and I crossed over from Jordan, we had in mind we were going to drive as close as possible to see what we can see. We were pretty certain we're not going to get into Gaza. That'd be a fluke if we did. But we wanted to just get in, and we just drove in. And obviously, the military was still very confused in that moment. On October 9th, they had no clue who's who, and you can see bodies everywhere. And they weren't even asking questions. They were just busy securing that perimeter. Didn't care. And by the end of that week, we were going to the kibbutz, all the different places where the attacks happened, and even in there, they were so disorganized to the point where at one point I was in kibbutz Be'eri, and I'd lost the tour the tour of journalists that had taken everybody through, and I lost them. I couldn't find my group, and my GPS wasn't working. I couldn't even figure my way out with Google Maps. And it's like a little what was it, a big subdivision, right? The kibbutz.
The kibbutz is, I would say,
how do you describe it?
A village.
Yeah, a village. It's a very large subdivision. And my GPS wasn't working.
GPS has been disabled. It's not that it wasn't working.
Right.
Yeah, and I just can't figure it out.
Are you in a car, or are you?
No, I was walking inside the kibbutz, and I was I can't figure out my way out of this big subdivision. And
well, it could look like a campus. So
it does,
paths, and not everything has, you can drive in a car, and you have to know your way around.
And obviously, this is a place of carnage. There's been tank fire, rocket fire, houses are destroyed, burnt down, bodies in some parts, and I keep making the wrong turn, and I keep ending up in the same place, and I'm just I'm lost. I'm officially inside this this
charnel house, basically.
Yeah, this haunted place, basically, on my own for hours, and then come sundown, I was able to find my way out.
Wow.
I found my way to the gate, and the soldiers were like, "I can't believe you're still here. There's still a journalist here."
Huh.
And it shows you how disorganized the army was even back then.
Wow. Wow.
But anyways, I see something on the screen now.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
But yeah, so they were in the beginning there. We were driving around. We can wander freely. The army was was so confused, and I was able to even hang out in one evening with the tank division.
Wow.
In the very beginning at the border, right on the border of Gaza. They were like, "What are you doing?" I was taking pictures of sunset. They were like, "Go for it."
Huh.
And these guys were prepping to this, go in, basically, just roll on in. And I think one of the things I've learned as doing this work is that you really, really have to be quick in the first couple of days and just get everything, and then from there retreat backwards as access closes down and do what you can. I take my experience from in Ukraine, for example. The first month of that war was mayhem. It was just there were no rules. They even didn't have a press card system yet, proper press card system. And I showed my company ID. That's it.
Yeah.
And they were like, "Okay, whatever, just go on through." And
sometimes I've just shown a business card. It's
in the Ukraine war, at some point they were letting us go into places where soldiers don't even go. At some point we were charting out where the bleeding edge was. We were like, okay, the Russians are only 100 meters away. Let's turn around now. So that was what it felt like covering that war. And I would say that it's not something I take lightly, but it's something you learn over time to trust your instincts, go in, move as fast as possible, and then from there just figure out what the bigger picture is. So cover the breaking news first, step back, and then cover the bigger picture.
Noga, talk to me about what your initial, I mean, because there must have been a moment where you're just thinking, my God, who do I know? Who's safe? Am I, you're just really thinking about, kind of as a person. But then eventually your journalistic instinct also kicks in, or maybe they're simultaneous for you.
My journalistic instinct kicked in the minute I was awakened. Like the first thing I did was put my hand up with my phone and record the air raid siren. In Jerusalem, it's fairly unusual. They had them again Saturday night. So I had a very different situation, of course, than Marcus, because I'm on site, and many media who I've worked for in the past or who follow me knew I was on site or assumed. So I started getting phone calls within minutes. When I was started, so for radios, for TVs, within an hour and a half or so, there was a crew on my balcony.
Wow. And
we were broadcasting to Latin America, to Spain, to France, to London, all kinds of things. And my main activity, at least in the first 48 hours, I felt like I was a filter. And from my balcony, you have this unique view of the whole Judean desert, and you can see the golden top, right, the Dome of the Rock. And so there was no doubt about where I was, and I kept trying to slow everyone down and saying, we don't know. And I remember many times saying it's going to be a lot worse than what we know right now. It was clear. In the first few hours, it was unclear, for example, what was even happening to me, what was happening in Tel Aviv. The assault was so massive, the number of missiles and rockets launched was so massive that people in Tel Aviv were all in bomb shelters, and it was unclear if there had been hits. There were a few. And then the nature of the attack in the south of the country was intellectually difficult to grasp. It was as if you live in a building. There was a big feeling of unreality. So you live in a 14-story building, and something unexpected happens, and suddenly you're living in a 7-story building. So there's a period of time that can be minutes or hours or days where you just feel disoriented. So the reality that the Israeli borders had simply melted away. There was no border security. The other thing was not only a weekend, but it was a Jewish holiday. So it was a long weekend. So a lot of people were on vacation. Many of the people who were taken hostage didn't actually live in these kibbutzim, or they were on vacation. They were visiting grandparents, family, friends. A lot of people had gone together as friends to this music festival. It was a long weekend type music festival that's now become well known. So there was this kind of feeling of chaos. And I remember, I mean, hundreds of times in those first 2 days saying, more than 1,000 dead, we don't know. Saying it's still ongoing. That first day I must have said that line, really 100 times, over and over, because it was clear that there was an assault ongoing and that there was no control over the borders, that entire communities were being ravaged. There's one kibbutz, Nir Oz, where I did a lot of work in the past, that lost 25% of its members to murder or kidnap. So it was very chaotic, and my way of coping was very professional and very much trying to make sure I was delimiting what we really knew and what we didn't yet know. And now I'm remembering things, for example, the prime minister of the country didn't address the people for something like 18 hours. And when he did, it was a pre-recorded, crappily made video. And so by that point, that was in the night of the 7th, between the 7th and the 8th, and it was clear to me that he and the government were not capable of actually being honest with the people about what had happened.
Well, and what you had spent your time focused on and what your coverage had really been focused on, I mean, you wrote at one point that, before October 7th, Israel had been through, one of the worst years in memory. This was a country in deep, deep, deep crisis. So can you talk a little bit about, kind of how you make that pivot from sort of political crisis where you're sort of covering, a huge protest movement and that to, kind of becoming a sort of war correspondent?
It didn't feel to me like that much of a pivot. It felt like a continuation of the emergency. The situation in Israel before this attack was really bad. And it felt insecure, physically insecure. Even during the pandemic, when the Israeli protest movement, at that time was called the Black Flag Movement, first arose, when Netanyahu made his first effort to steal the power of the state and use the pandemic to cover it, and he shuttered the parliament for 2 days illegally. It failed, but it was a wake-up signal. To me, it was a very clear wake-up signal of what he was really trying to do. And so I kind of had my eye on this stuff. And for example, you could feel in the way police operated at the edges of the protests. Here we're seeing some images. The way it was changing over the passing months and how it was becoming less controlled, more and more violent, more and more arbitrary. So I felt steeled somehow. I was as shocked, on a certain level, I was absolutely as shocked as everybody. I was shocked, certain things over time shocked me. The fact that the borders were so completely and totally unprotected, I had to, glob onto that. But I was not shocked that a huge disaster had happened. I was absolutely steeled for that. It was clear to me the country was on a very bad course. I'd been writing about it. But there were scenes that you just don't really expect to see, right? Incinerated families. And I don't need to continue, but there were really scenes that you don't expect, I didn't expect I would see in my lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, as writers, we can describe things, and we sort of do our best to capture. But Marcus, you write and you also take photographs. How do you think about approaching a scene like the one that you described in the kibbutzim that you went to, and how do you think about sensitively capturing kind of what you're seeing and balancing the sort of dignity of the people involved with the desire to give a accurate reflection of what's happening?
I mean, very carefully, as it's very difficult. I mean, there are pictures that I've made that I feel like I can't even publish just because it's just too gory sometimes. I mean, how many pictures of corpses do you need before it becomes gratuitous, right? So it's very, very difficult in that sense. I feel like I'm just gonna go to the picture. It's a picture here I'm looking for.
Oh, you're controlling.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm looking for one here. Right here. This is from that first day when I arrived, and we're just driving by, and then you see on the side of the road, corpses around, instead of walking up to it, and just taking a picture of the corpses, how can I better frame this, right? So I waited there for maybe as long as I could before I got chased away by the army to wait for some vehicle to pass me, a tow truck pass with all the destroyed vehicle. Then I was like, all right, this is the way I framed this. I don't have to make the bodies, the gore, front and center. Otherwise, I mean, we work in the newspaper business. We don't normally show bodies as a rule, unless it's newsworthy enough. And I feel like I have to keep that in mind too. We have readers who cannot, American readers who cannot stomach the violence.
And there are arguments about, sort of desensitization, that if you, are constantly seeing violent images, that you become sort of inured to them. But yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah.
I actually haven't discussed this with you. I have very mixed feelings about this question because I also think it's part of our job to show these horrors. And if part of what news delivery is photographic, I think that's also, for me it's not a simple thing. And I just wanted to point out that last week, if I'm not mistaken, just a few days ago, an AP picture received this prize of Picture of the Year.
Yeah. And there was some controversy about it, which I'm assuming you're going to talk about. Yeah.
Well, I want to mention it because there were, all of these perpetual cyber complainers.
Could you just quickly let people know what the photo was?
That's it. So the picture that won this award was a picture by a Palestinian photographer, if I'm not mistaken, of a young Israeli festival goer, obviously a young woman wearing shorts or a miniskirt, and her body is so damaged it's distorted, and she's been pulled across the flatbed of a van, and she's surrounded by terrorists, armed men displaying their trophy. You don't see her face, but you see her broken body. It's unclear if she's dead or alive. And this was one of the pictures that was a signal picture of that day, of October 7th. It's important to remember also that this particular terror attack had the bizarreness or the newness that it was filmed and photographed and displayed live by the people perpetrating it. The Hamas forces that invaded Israel had GoPro cameras, and this was being broadcast. And moreover, on the Facebook pages of many of the victims, their phones were taken by the terrorists, the Facebook app opened. There is a famous case of people, I don't know why I'm laughing, one woman, young woman, discovering that her grandmother was murdered because it was broadcast live on the grandma's own Facebook page. So the whole question of photography has been, I think, not sufficiently analyzed and studied yet. But this Palestinian photographer was accused by people who call themselves pro-Israel of being a terrorist himself. To my knowledge, with zero evidence, but just because he was there and he covered it, and it was at this crucial moment. And again, people referring to themselves as pro-Israel complained that the picture was an abuse towards this young woman who initially was listed among the kidnapped, the Israeli hostages, and eventually was listed among the dead, though her body has never been returned. She's one of those cases. And then her dad was interviewed on Israeli radio. And her dad was in tears, and he said, it's one of the most important pictures of the year. Everyone should see it. And I thought, his words were so moving. First of all, as a testament to the importance of what we do to transmit these. Imagine, and I was thinking, imagine if this picture were not being prized, were not recognized for its importance. Right? What should the complaint then be, right? Are we trying to conceal what happened? And I thought his words were extremely moving. I'm not a gory person, and I'm not arguing for gore, but I am arguing for the value of transmitting the news, and in this case, photographic news. And I thought he felt validated. The horror he has lived through, the loss of his child, he felt validated by the fact that this photographer's picture was being recognized in that way. And I found that really validating for me.
It was really, really remarkable. In those moments, so you sort of go to the southern border. You're reporting. Marcus, I'm guessing your mind is quickly moving to, okay, next stage is almost certainly going to be, both of you are thinking this, almost certainly going to be some kind of military action in Gaza. What then? Are you thinking, how do I how do you position yourself? What do you do in order to kind of continue covering the story?
I mean, there's no access to Gaza. I mean, and it is extremely difficult to cover this war without getting access to the most important part of the story, obviously. And I feel like it's I don't know, it's hampering a lot of, it's in some ways very disabling to be a journalist covering this war from the outside, but in other ways it's I have a lot of respect for all the Gazan journalists, Palestinian journalists inside of Gaza. They've done a tremendous job covering this war, covering their backyard, you know, under extremely, extremely difficult circumstances. I'm watching in awe from far away, but it's also, I'm watching with a little bit of fear, because like we're seeing the highest amount of journalists getting killed in this war. I mean, I think the numbers are, like you told me, I think up to 95 journalists.
95, yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of journalists getting killed in one war.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, how are they going to replenish their ranks? I mean, let alone like if I'm as a photographer, a lot of our profession, occupation is based on technology and equipment. I mean, I don't even know how they keep their cameras clean, how they even keep it working all the time, like let alone charged and, you know, send information out, file photos, videos all the time. It's impossible. I mean, I have a colleague who I will not name here, working inside Gaza, who I've worked with since like 2018, right, working with us. And communicating with her during the war was extremely difficult. I mean, I would see we WhatsApp each other, and I would see that my messages don't get to her during certain times of the day because there's no power or there's no signal, and she has to conserve the power, because there's not a lot of opportunities to charge her phone. And at some point of the war, there even wasn't enough gasoline to drive cars around, so a lot of journalists were walking around. Photographers were walking to places, from like that one point they were working out of. Some of them at some point were working out of Shifa Hospital.
Yeah.
So they were walking from there for kilometers just to get to certain places, to do their shoots and then come back. And it's incredibly difficult. I mean, without clean running water, without proper ways to get food, without ways to get, I mean, it's an impossible situation, and they've done an extremely astounding job just covering this war from, I mean, watching every day. I mean, some of them are still in there. A lot of them have exited, fortunately, but some of them are still in there. So, I mean, I hope that at some point, the IDF will allow international media to go in to at least just for the sake of replenishing the ranks, just to help them out, not take over their jobs, but at least help them out.
Yeah, we decided to leave a chair empty at the event for our colleagues in Gaza and elsewhere who are struggling to do this work under very, very difficult circumstances. So I think we have a video from the committee.
Water?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not helping. It's allergy season, which means that this happens sometimes. So the committee to protect, sorry guys, maybe we should cue the video. If you don't.
All journalists in Gaza are suffering under the most difficult of circumstances: fuel shortages, food shortages, challenges of shelter, bombardments.
All right, Yumna, please take cover.
This is my local hospital. Inside are my friends, my neighbors. This is my community. Today has been one of the most difficult days in my career.
We don't have internet, we don't have electricity, we can't call each other, we can't text each other.
I lost my battery also.
And we can't charge.
Thank you. So the committee to protect journalists, and I, full disclosure, I'm vice chair of the board, and thank you for that lozenge. That really helped. This conflict, 95 journalists have died since it began, which is the largest number since any conflict, since CPJ has been keeping track, which is, in the modern era, really quite unprecedented. Now, what is the challenge? I'm sorry? We're going to do Q&A at the end, if you don't mind. So there has been a tremendous amount of questions about why international journalists have not been allowed into Gaza. CPJ, major news organizations have been requesting for access. I thought, Noga, maybe you could talk a little bit about your role in pursuing that access, and then also, maybe some of the reasons why that access has not yet happened.
I think there are a number of reasons for it. I was part of a lawsuit filed by the Foreign Press Association in Israel and the occupied territories in order to demand access, which failed. Why are they doing this? I think there are a lot of reasons, some more interesting than others. I almost wish I could tell you it's because they want to control the narrative. I think that Israeli incompetence vis-a-vis understanding what communications means, what the communications array of a sovereign state should look like, should operate like. Israel in some ways is a technologically advanced country, and in others is a small provincial country that has always been vulnerable to attack. And for many years, reiterated governments in Israel, all of them led by Netanyahu, who's been prime minister for a very, very long time, made decisions that trickled down eventually into basically all of the institutions of the state that should be operating the major communications arrays, the foreign ministry, the army, right? So you should never have the prime minister of Israel does not have a spokesperson. Let that sink in. There's no person who has the title. There's no Karine Jean-Pierre. There's no briefings. Okay, so when this attack happened of October 7th, and almost random people who considered themselves expert or who just spoke English volunteered. And so the ridiculousness, the clownishness of this, what ended up happening is that the army does have a spokesperson's unit, and that unit became the spokesperson's, the comms op for the entire country, since no one else had one. And that is one level of the incompetence. The other is that within the army, like within ministries, over time, the job of spokesperson has been deprofessionalized and has become a kind of crony-esque job. I'm speaking in technicalities, but all of this has added up to the current situation. The spokesperson of the Israeli army, who is an admiral called Daniel Hagari, who I'm sure most people sitting here have seen on TV at some point, he became the spokesperson of the Israeli army a few weeks before this attack. And this is his first job that has to do with media in his life. He's a man in his mid-40s. Apparently he was a very brave Navy SEAL. He knows about media what I know about shoemaking.
Right. Well,
and he became the top spokesperson for the entire country vis-a-vis the whole world. So in part, these decisions were made as a result of ignorance and incompetence, not so much out of an evil intent. The result, in my opinion, has been catastrophic.
Well, yeah, Maria, I was going to ask, because you've been on embeds, right? I mean, you worked in Afghanistan. You've been in a lot of places where, you navigate and negotiate access and work alongside, even in offensive operations. So I'd love just to hear you talk about both what you think we're missing and then also, how has this worked in other conflicts?
I mean, first of all, I'll add to what Noga said, which is from conversations that I've had with like army officials, politicians, like a few high level.
Feel free to name names.
No, I won't. I won't just for the sake of brevity, but from what I was made to understand, the reason why we're not allowed to go in, number one, is the safety of journalists. They cite the safety of journalists. It's too dangerous for you to go in, you will get killed. And my argument to them has always been, well, why are you killing the journalists in there? And number two, I was made to understand this, is that international journalists do not serve the core constituent of this war. And the core constituent of this war are the Israeli public. And only the Israeli media serve that constituency. And that's what I was made to understand through these different conversations all across the board.
So there's a sort of two-part. I mean, one thing is, what's interesting in that we've had a lot of conversations about this, with the Committee to Protect Journalists and others, on this question of why are so many journalists dying. And the reality is that, we often think about journalists dying being like, you sort of run into a war zone and then get sadly killed. You think of somebody like Marie Colvin, for example, or there are many historical examples of this. In this case, these are journalists who are civilians who are living in their homes, doing their jobs also, but they're just part of the civilian population of Gaza who are experiencing the same thing as. So it's interesting that there is this response that we can't guarantee your safety, because. In other conflicts, I think there has been a clear ability to bring, international journalists into conflict zones and allowing them safe places to operate because there is a policy of protecting civilians, just more broadly, and journalists are civilians.
I would say, look at the example of the Palestinian journalist Shireen, who was, shot and killed. And this was pre-October 7th, and there was an investigation into it, and they found that she was shot by the Israeli military, but nothing ever happened. There was no accountability there and whatsoever. And Shireen was living and working there. She She wasn't living where she was killed. She was on the job in Jenin.
Mm-hmm.
She wasn't living in Jenin, right? But she basically was a civilian living in Israel.
She lived near me in Jerusalem.
Right. Yeah. And worked, in the West Bank like every other journalist that goes into the West Bank, and then it's hard to and in the past, if I've covered in other wars, when we go in embeds, there's a clear protection of journalists mandate, right? You go in with, in Iraq, we would go on embeds with the army, and the army would do everything they can to protect you, even the Iraqi army, and in Afghanistan, the same thing. You go on the embeds, they do everything they can. You are first priority, civilians are first priority. And in this war, I don't know, it's a gray area. I don't know what to make of it. There are no conventions that I understand that apply to this war.
I think we have to, though, delineate some differences. So even, first of all, in Iraq and in Afghanistan, we don't even know the number of Afghani journalists who were killed in that conflict because no one was keeping track. Okay.
Oh, I think CPJ was keeping track, yeah.
I don't think we know a real number. In Iraq, I think we have better information. And the embeds, in every case that I know, are protected. Embeds with the Israeli army are also protected. Not all foreign media got it, not all got access. You and I didn't. I have complained about this vociferously because they chose. The US Army also chose who they wanted to go in and choose what they show embeds. To my knowledge, no journalist, foreign or domestic, who has been embedded with the Israeli army has been harmed in any way. Yep. And I think we have to say something about the reality of Gaza, which I tried to emphasize in my seminar early today. part of the tragedy of Gaza started many, many years ago, and the world was silent. The suffering of the people who live in Gaza didn't start on October 7th or 8th. It started much longer ago, but let's begin with the extremely violent takeover by Hamas. Gazan people have been living in a dangerous and authoritarian and arbitrary system and besieged inside that system for a very, very long time. And every interested party, the Gulf states, the State of Israel, Egypt, the Palestinian Authority to whatever extent it did, Europe, the UN, the United States, every stakeholder in this region was okay with Hamas turning Gaza into its own fortress to protect its own power while the people there suffered. Okay? I don't think we should be hiding this. Everyone failed. The title of my seminar earlier today was like an array of failure. Everyone failed. So if you talk to completely British and American experts in urban fighting, sit in front of you in the last few weeks, sit in front of me and describe a situation of urban combat in Gaza that no one has ever seen before, that can't be compared to Mosul. And we don't know actually how many people died in Mosul. We have an idea, and it's a lot worse than what we've seen in Gaza. So I think we have to put this catastrophe underway now in a perspective of space and time in which this situation was allowed to be built up. The war, it didn't emerge like this out of no context. And so I think part of the reason so many people are dying is that the way Hamas managed Gaza was designed so that a maximum amount of people would die. That's how they protected themselves. They are on the record saying it. Even during the war, in one interview that went viral on Saudi TV, a Hamas leader was asked by a Saudi journalist, "You have all these tunnels, why aren't they bomb shelters for your population?" And he replied, "The UN could take care of the population, we're taking care of ourselves."
We're going to start for audience questions in a second, but Marcus, you spent a significant amount of time photographing and working in Gaza. I'd love to hear a little bit about your impressions. There were sort of two separate periods that you spent. There was a tremendous amount of violence after the right to return march, but would just love to hear your impressions, just having spent time there.
I mean, first I'll say the obvious. It's a really small place. It's not a very big piece of area. You can traverse it really quickly. I've been very fortunate to have worked with like some tremendous local journalists, drivers, translators in Gaza. I saw them. I mean, when I went in there, what struck me the most on my first visit was that they were all struggling. It's very hard to eke out a living there. Get food. There's like power shortages all the time. It was not an easy life living in Gaza itself. I mean, and the only way you'll make a living is if you have language skills and you could work as a translator for like Western media or NGOs and all that. I found the Gazans, there were so many levels of society that I could not access, obviously. Like, I've only been able to access what I could see on street level, like, which are Gazans who opened up their home stores and all that stuff, but I'm sure there were like many, many layers that I did not see while I was there. Like, we would go to like military parades sometimes, and where in 2021, I remember going to the Islamic Jihad military parade, where they were like claiming victory, and they were like showcasing all their rockets driving through the open streets of Gaza, and you're like, wow, you can, pretty brazen, for them to just show off their guns and all that, and everybody's out on the march.
And you're just able to photograph that.
I'm able to just photograph it.
They're probably
walk
very
around.
happy for you to photograph it. Yeah.
I mean, I think they were keeping track of me. They had a minder on me the entire time. I had a nom de guerre. I could hear them speaking.
What was your nom de guerre?
They called me Abu Labiba. So I can hear my name on the radio sometimes when I walk past the fighters, like, they were announcing where I was to each other. My movement is definitely tracked inside Gaza. I go in at the beehive. When we enter Gaza as journalists, you leave Israel at the Erez crossing. You exit Israel, like properly exit a country. And you go into Gaza and you get permission from Hamas to enter and work inside there. So the Hamas issues you just like paperwork almost. Like you now have permission to work as media inside Gaza, which is a strange thing. It's very formal almost. And once in there, you never know if you're being followed. Somebody's always watching you somewhere. And as a photographer, I'm always watching and I'm always paying attention. And I can always see somebody on their phone looking at your car driving past and then just like pick up the phone and just like make a phone call. It's like the movies. Like it feels like the movies. You're like, yep, that's a spotter. That's a spotter. That's a spotter. So, I mean, I can do the stories I can do. Like in the Right to Return March, I only focused on the stories that mattered, which was like the people protesting and how they were maimed and shot. For the purpose of maiming them, basically. So a lot of them had to be amputated after the protests. The ones that were shot and still survived. And most of them were young men who could not, obviously, were the sole breadwinners of their families. So after being maimed, they could not really provide for their families anymore. So what happened to them? So and the hospitals during that period of protests in 2018 were under an enormous amount of stress already, right? And they already had lack of medical supplies, lack of, sometimes lack of doctors in certain divisions. And I remember doing a story about a guy who was getting, going through the amputation process. And it's a procedure, and they would rather amputate quickly and just get this person out of the hospital as fast as possible, instead of like actually giving a chance for, his foot to heal. And I think we're seeing that in this war now, and we're hearing stories of people like, who are injured or survived like a bombing, an Israeli airstrike, and then like, a shrapnel or something hit their leg or a limb, and then you see the Gazan doctors just wanting to amputate as fast as possible so they can like move people through the wards basically and not have a backlog of people. I was just recently in Doha to check on my Gazan colleague who evacuated out of Gaza, and they were living in this compound at the behest of the Qatari government, basically. And in there, I saw hundreds of children. Like most of them were injured from the war. So there were children just running around. It felt very dystopian, and this was housing made for the World Cup that was never used.
Wow.
So, and hundreds of children, some of them are amputated, some of them on a wheelchair, some of them in casts, like, just running around, some of them wearing like Disney princess clothing, and they're being children, and they have bubble guns, they have, soccer balls, and you're like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
And most of them were injured, really just for being children. They were mostly playing outside, you can't blame children. They weren't, and it's hard. It's very, it's heartbreaking to see all that and listen to the stories their parents would tell us. Like, but yeah, it's. I digress. But like, it's very difficult to see that and know all that is going on. I think one of the things I want to point out is on top of that. Anyways, I should stop right here.
Well, we're going to give people a chance
Yeah.
to ask questions, so please, there's a mic right here. If you can just line up and to ask your questions. Also, I know this is a very emotional subject. We're going to do our best. We're journalists up here to answer your questions to the best of our knowledge, but obviously we're not decision makers. So yes, please.
Hi, my name is Revati, and I'm a MPP student, a public policy student at the Harris School of Public Policy. As journalists, how do you think, how would you view the concept of international solidarity for journalists in Gaza who really don't have the option of, let's say, not showing gore? And as journalists also associated with established, news organizations like the New York Times and LA Times, how can we ensure there's more accountability for the lives lost of journalists? For those who, let's say, can't ensure the accountability, if either one of you want to answer that.
Somebody want to take that?
I mean, in terms of international solidarity, I assure you, I think there is a sense of international solidarity for all our fellow brethren, who are killed in this war. I mean, I know I have some friends who are amongst those who are killed, and I don't take this lightly, and none of us do. I think it's journalism is like a big tribe, and when I meet a fellow journalist anywhere in the world, we immediately bond, we connect, there's nothing like it. I may not know anything about this person, where they're from, but I know we are, cut from the same cloth. We have the same rules, we live the same, almost the same way in terms of our work. So, and in terms of what we can do for accountability is to continue to report. And that's all it is. I mean, there's nothing, it feels like in this war, we have the CPJ to thank for keeping track of the casualties, for sure. And it's hard for us to keep track of it without more resources on the ground, without going in there to verify things. Because there's only that much we can do from watching this, news being reported on social media. And we can't really, I don't repost anything that I can't verify. Mm-hmm. When I see videos coming out, online and all that from Gaza, from the West Bank, as inflammatory as it is, or as crazy as it sounds, I need to make sure everything is double checked, triple checked, because I don't know where it's from. For all I know, it's a deep fake. We don't know, unless reputable outlets like Al Jazeera, the New York Times, the Washington Post, posts it, publishes it, then we can share those things.
Associated Press
also,
yeah.
I just want to point out that Al Jazeera has made some pretty bad mistakes during this war. Even the New York Times, which I admire, has made some bad mistakes. So even media, British media, the BBC has made I don't know how many apologies and not apologized for others. It's been a really complicated, difficult a situation to verify. And in addition to the deep fakes, there's also intentional propaganda put out there. So you're kind of swimming in a sea where if you didn't take the picture and you weren't there or you didn't speak to the person, it's very, very, very dangerous. And I think we all have to be incredibly careful.
And this is the problem why international media should be in there.
That's what I was getting to.
Without being in there, we can't verify certain things.
Not allowing journalists in my opinion, I said it has caused a catastrophe. One small aspect of that catastrophe is it has allowed conspiracy theories, nefarious propaganda, intentional deepfakes, and all of this world of crap that pretends to be journalism to flourish. Because we don't have eyes and ears on the ground saying, I was there.
Right.
It's a disaster. It's one of the disasters of this policy.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Hi, thank you for sharing your experiences and your opinions. My question is, previously you have shared the challenges of journalism by kind of organized systems such as a state or kind of a local regime. I was wondering what are the challenges and what's your opinion on dealing with these challenges when you're operating in the front lines where due to the lack of management or lack of the local policing, there might be also kind of less organized, spontaneous challenges like crimes or either theft or burglaries or maybe even kidnapping to journalists that was selling there. How do you think journalism? How do you handle with such kind of challenges?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. As you were talking, I was thinking about some of so I've actually never reported from Israel or Palestine. So I spent a whole career essentially avoiding the Middle East for a variety of reasons. But I have spent a lot of time in places like, the Congo, or places that or Darfur in Sudan, places where there is a tremendous amount of chaos, where control and warlordism and things like that, and colleagues who've worked in places like Somalia. So yeah, I'm curious for both of you, working in those kinds of environments where authority is not clear, and where there isn't anybody that can really vouch for your safety.
I can only speak to the most recent thing, at least for now. I mean, in terms of like crime, and I think I never worried about crime so much when I was working in this war, whether or not be in Israel or in the West Bank. Probably because Israel is the most heavily, it's a big surveillance state. Mm-hmm. Nothing, nobody will run away with anything, basically, with so many cameras around. I think they're inside the old city of Jerusalem, the old ancient city. There are probably more cameras in there. I wonder if there are more cameras in there than in Washington, D.C., per se. They were able to, they are able to pick out people going to pray on Friday that were told last week they can't come back. People in the crowds just mingling in, they were able to pick that guy out. It's like, pull him out. I was like, how did they find him? Out of thousands of people streaming in is surveillance, the facial recognition. And even in the West Bank, every turn you make, every a couple hundred meters, every kilometer, is there are cameras pointing us at the cars. They're registering our license plate, they're registering our face in the car, so they can keep track of us, where we go in the West Bank. They know everything. And now with the rise of AI, and and I can't even imagine the amount of control they have over this information. You can plug in, based on my trajectory and where I've been in the West Bank, they can figure out where I'm going next. Based on the pattern, basically.
I mean, that's dystopian and sort of terrifying. I would always tell my mother when I'd go to a war zone that, as a statistical matter, I was more likely to be killed in a car accident. Which is actually, I joke, but it's actually true. One of my closest friends, who's one of the most famous war photographers in the world, the closest that she ever came to dying on assignment was actually in a very, very bad car crash. And she was kidnapped in Libya, and has had lots of really, really terrible experiences. But that was the most closest to death. So
I think so. Even in the West Bank, I'll answer the second part. In the West Bank, I never worried about petty crime and all that stuff, and lawlessness and all that. Even working inside the refugee camps in different cities, the militia, the fighters, whatever you call them, or that are in charge, when you're in that zone, you're
part of their protection.
You're part of their protection. Yeah. It's a weird honor code almost. It's strange. I don't know how to describe it. Nothing will happen to you unless they say so.
Yeah. The culture of hospitality, right? That when someone invites you into their community. So it's interesting. Yes, please. Yeah.
Do you have a perception of what the sentiment is on the Israeli side and on the Palestinian civilian side about how this ends?
It's a big question.
Well, I'll take that. I'll say there are a number of things. The Palestinian Authority is being much more responsive, for all of its flaws, and it has them, is being much more responsive and much more forward-thinking thus far than the Israeli government. So the Palestinian president, who is 80-something and pretty decrepit, changed his entire government just a little more than a month ago.
Yeah, recently.
New prime minister, entire new mechanism, new people, and designed to be a structure more palatable to the United States and to the Gulf states, to the principal foreign stakeholders, so that they're preparing to take over in Gaza, which I want to see as a positive thing. I don't know, my sense among both Israelis and Palestinians right now is one of real despair. I'm not sure anybody sees an end-point right now, and there's so many ways that the current situation could still get worse, and might not, but might. The Israeli government, for internal political reasons, is simply refusing, or is incapable, I don't know, whatever you want to say, to contemplate an endpoint. I'm going to repeat something I already said this morning. I think it's very important. The Prime Minister of Israel, whose support among his voters is at about 20%, has said in public that if elections were brought forth, it's a parliamentary system, his government could be toppled, he could be forced into new elections. He said that if that happens, that will be a victory for Hamas. And that's what something close to 80% of Israelis are asking for. So the government is refusing to contemplate what it views as its own demise. And, you see how that looks.
And then now, of course, with Iran, firing missiles, and that's, things get more complicated.
It is more complicated. So, but, Iran was part of this from day one. The weaponry that was used by Hamas.
Hamas couldn't have done this without Iran.
No, Hamas used Iranian weapons, and its most elite fighters were trained by Iran to do this. So this is definitely a major step up, and I think principally the threat is to countries beyond Israel. If Iran can shoot suicide drones, hundreds of suicide drones at Israel, it can do it at London. That's the message behind all this. Okay, it's a message of asserting power. It can do it to Saudi Arabia. Why did Saudi Arabia participate in the array of nations stopping this Iranian attack Saturday night? It's because they know the message to them. But we were asked what the people feel. I think people across the board right now are feeling a kind of despair.
I agree. I mean, I think everybody I've talked to, especially in the West Bank, Palestinians are feeling like this is just the beginning of the war. This is we're not even at the end yet. And this is the start of, a very, very, very long war.
Yeah, and in my conversations with people, they describe on both sides feeling like they're being held hostage.
That was the headline of my piece marking 6 months of this war, was that Netanyahu is holding Israelis and Palestinians hostage.
Well, and Hamas is holding Palestinians hostage.
Hamas, it's one of its principal tenets is to hold Palestinians hostage. But the reason I keep bringing this up is everybody knew it. Everyone who has an interest in this region knew it. And we allowed this to happen over a period of 17 or 18 years. And I think we should not let those people, those governments, those individuals who have held power all these years off the hook so lightly about how we let this happen. Hamas is not all powerful. It became this powerful, and people knew it.
Yeah. Please. Yep. We got time for one more. Yeah.
Following the maxim, never let a crisis go to waste, isn't it possible that exactly the horrible situation you present would be a catalyst to holding people to account and bringing about some, two-state solution, for example? Or is it the case that this is actually part of a bigger world war thing, that Russia, Iran, North Korea, China are in a kind of alliance, and so the breaking out of war in Gaza leads people like J.D. Vance in the U.S. Congress to say, well, we can't provide arms to Ukraine, we have to provide them to Israel. So there could be method to this madness that it actually is a sound, rational strategy on the part of Russia, Iran, and so on. So is it an opportunity, or is it the beginning of more calamity? And I also was going to ask, I was actually going to ask, it's so astounding to hear you say that Netanyahu doesn't have a press secretary. Does that mean that he regards his policy as inarticulable or indefensible? Or like even Baghdad, even Saddam Hussein had Baghdad bomb, and Putin has Dmitry Peskov to articulate an official doctrine. Yeah. So in the absence of a doctrine, that itself would be worth some investigative journalism to find out why.
Yeah.
Netanyahu considers himself above the media, that he considers trashy riffraff. I think the answer to your complicated question is yes. I think there are opportunities here. I think we see the United States government attempting to try and direct things in that direction. I think it is possible that something good will eventually emerge from the current catastrophe. But I think, yes, it's evident that we're in a period of very dangerous, very violent global alliances. The same suicide drones that were launched at Israel Saturday night and that may be launched again have been launched against Ukrainian civilians every single day. They're the same Iranian drones used by Russia. I don't know if you remember, we were so shocked under 2 years ago to hear, oh my God, Iranian suicide drones, Iranian missiles are being aimed at these Ukrainian cities, at Kharkiv. So we're in a period of very nefarious global alliances. And all of this, all of your questions are in the air.
I mean, it's possible that, I mean, with the amount of U.S. involvement in this war and the amount of U.S. involvement in Ukraine war, the U.S. now is strung out, I guess, you know, in two separate conflicts. I mean, it's funny because the end of Afghanistan and that forever war, when I walked out of that, I thought finally we're done with wars. Like America's done with wars. Like,
at least Middle East wars. Yeah.
At least Middle East, like just war, like active wars in general, right?
Yep.
I thought we were done with that, but then obviously Ukraine came, and then this came, and then now we're back in it again in full swing. So we are in some ways tied. I don't know, I can't see the bigger picture because I'm like too deep in it. I'm sort of in the hornets, you know, the eye of the storm, as they say. So I can't really see what's going on the global scale. I do know that, like, you know, what happened on Saturday was definitely unprecedented in the sense of, like, I've never seen, like, you know, drones launched from Iran to Israel.
No one has ever seen it.
No. But that to say, I mean, those drones are not flying very, very fast. I mean, the Shahed drone top speed is 100.
They came with cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. It wasn't just the drones.
Correct. Yes, but the drones were interceptable. They were very, very slow, and they were alerted to the drones.
And well telegraphed, right?
Yeah,
in the U.S., you know, they clearly wanted the world to know that they were coming. It's very hard to know. I mean, you know, every crisis creates opportunities, and I am an inveterate optimist. So
yeah, I'm not sure who's gaining from this. All I know is, like, when this war started, I know the biggest winners are, some winners are like the arms manufacturers.
Always.
You know,
Always.
Raytheon, the company that is involved in the what do you call the defense?
The Iron Dome.
The Iron Dome, the production of the Iron Dome parts, basically. Their stocks jump.
Iron Dome is just defensive, let's say.
Yeah, just defensive. You know, they've announced after the war that they were going to open a manufacturing plant in a new state. You know, and the value of their stocks just rose dramatically. You know, since that war.
And I want to say that Ukraine has been begging for Iron Dome technology for almost 2 years and has been denied it. Reportedly by Israel at the beginning, and now by Republicans. And it's purely defensive technology.
Yeah. Well, things are probably going to get worse before they get better. Marcus Noga, thank you so much. And thank you all for coming. Fascinating conversation.